Thank you, Lenny, very much for the introduction, and also thank you, Progressive Democrats of America, this chapter, for inviting me here. I know that I'm not part of your particular political party, but in terms of values, the founding principles, when we talk about progressivism, we're very much a part of the exact same movement. I'm coming from Minnesota, where a number of political parties can vie for power within the state governments. In my mind, a citizen democracy requires participation. A healthy democracy requires participation by people that are working within the communities in which we're living, that are serving for a particular point of time, and then leaving office once people have decided they're unsatisfied with the choices that they're making or they need to move on. Having essentially only one party in Chicago, I don't think has really served us very well. Instead of our representatives making decisions based on what is in the best interest of the people in their districts, they are instead avoiding decisions that will be controversial and in many cases shielded from them by the leadership to ensure that they can get reelected. Instead of civil servants, in many cases, we have self-servants. My point in this is to stress the idea that my being part of the Green Party, as opposed to the Democratic Party, is mostly to create an alternative voice within the State House, within government in general. I think we're better served by multiple set of parties that are forced to work together on issues, instead of this notion that we have a Democratic Party that serves conservative interests and a Democratic Party which is by default meant to encompass a lot of progressive positions, which in this case, all we really have in Chicago is a Democratic Party, and we're just constantly fighting for who controls the identity of it. Meanwhile, they do their darndest to shut out any alternative parties. The Green Party was only established here with Rich Whitney's run, when he got 11% statewide, and we're going to need to continue to fight for that. And that became perfectly clear during this last legislative session, when they passed a bill that we know it as the Protect Incumbents bill, like in our party. However, that's probably not how they're viewing it, which took away the power of slating and increased the signature requirements for independent political candidates and alternative political parties in a way to try to make sure that no one else is coming and trying to challenge the establishment. This is also coming to play in my personal life. Apart from coming from Minnesota, I am a mental health therapist. I work in a residential facility down just east of downtown, or west of downtown. And I also work as a domestic violence counselor in Logan Square. And the last few months have been particularly unsettling being part of that community. Watching as my clients, in the first place, and secondly, my colleagues, are used as pawns or political cover in order to try to drum up enough support to get a tax increase passed. There was nothing more amazing than being outside the Thompson Center, I think it was about 2 weeks ago at this point, watching the massive rallies of not only people in social services from all across the state, but homeless people, other clients of mine, people from agencies that had already been shut down, people who had already been given their pink slips, walking around with signs that said, "Please raise my taxes." And at a time when the Senate had passed Meeks's bill, which would have put in effect a de facto progressive income tax increase, to watch the House completely fall apart. And I think Quinn at the IVI IPO dinner the other night said that he called Madigan and said, "What do you think, should we shoot for the moon?" And then the notion was, no, we're definitely not going to go for that. Because how am I supposed to get my people reelected if they vote for this? That isn't the mindset that we want in our state representatives. Instead, the focus should have been on those people before they lost their jobs. I know a number of people at this point that have been laid off in social services. And today, not to get off on this point, but today I became even more upset because I watched as Quinn, in a moment that was celebrated by many, signed a capital bill. And in essence, I can support the idea of what this is going to do in terms of the jobs it's going to create, the projects it's going to bring. Supportive housing is even in the capital bill, and I love supportive housing. I fight for it in Logan Square. But it comes with a price, a significant price. At a time when they're cutting social services, this bill included an expansion, or rather an implementation of video gaming. The consoles and terminals that we stuck in bars across the state. In my mind, we're instead tying our social values to our social vices and saying, what we need here is a proliferation of gambling to ensure that our capital projects are carried out. We're relying on the continuation of addictions, and we're relying on a de facto tax on the poor, and which is particularly ironic when you consider the idea that it's funding supportive housing. I'm a working class kid. And our community has an extremely strong community activism component. And I was involved with the Logan Square Neighborhood Association. I was involved with Chicago Single Payer Action Network, with the socialists that are organizing in that neighborhood, with Metropolitan Domestic Battered Women's Network. All these local organizations that are working extremely hard on the ground to ensure that the needs of the people in our communities are met, ensuring that when we are doing economic development, we're not shoving people out, that we are raising up the people that we have, investing in our community members. From that vantage point, the notion became quite clear that although I'm newer to the neighborhood, been there 5 years, I'm not new to what we're working on here. We ended up with around $5,000 and we ran a variety of particularly effective advertisements throughout the Logan Square area in order to try and compensate for the notion that we weren't having a significant chunk of people. Running a progressive campaign at the same time that every progressive activist I swear that I could nail down was going to Indiana to try to get Obama elected. Yeah, Bruce, cover your he's looking at the ground. No, I watched busloads of y'all heading to Indiana on election day, and I was like, come on, someone's got to stick around. So running with a small chunk of money, we ended up relying on some robocalls, which everyone hates, but they're incredibly effective, because it sounds like, hey, Jeremy Karpen's calling, and people gave pretty good feedback about that. CTA ads, which are not extremely expensive, but get the people that you're working for. When you're running ads and you're talking about transportation, that was a very effective way to be bringing people into the campaign. I still have a significant amount of support in the community and a significant amount of name recognition, and also the fact that I'm running against someone who, for lack of a better word, doesn't really do much of anything. That's not a word, that's a phrase. But running against a non-entity is both positive and extremely difficult, because in Illinois you're not able to really pin people down to controversial votes that they cast. For the most part, almost everyone's voting record is pretty much in line with a lot of our values, in part because those are the things that come to votes. And so it ends up being a race about what you're willing to actually be pushing for and fighting for. And that was another hard lesson from this last one, is the idea that I agreed at the outset I would do no negative campaigning whatsoever. I think the most negative we ever got was when she actually turned up to a forum, my opponent, and we went head to head, and it was quite a good display, I think, and showed our differences in a very stark manner, very positively toward myself. However, that was the last time that mistake was going to happen on her part. Until the machine candidates are afraid of losing their seats to true progressives and people that are representing the activism in the community, we're not going to see any change in the way that they're voting in the first place.